Hi everybody, thank you very much for watching this video. So some of you are familiar now with our video. We've been posting a few about the ingredients that we love, the ingredients that are commonly used by perfumers, and what we're trying to do, or what I try to do throughout these videos, is to kind of give you a little bit of the behind the scene of formulas and kind of help you understand the different type of ingredients. And so in today's video, I would like you to talk to you about famous composition. They also call specialties or bases. Okay, so for a lot of you, we don't necessarily dive into perfumery or create at home. That may be something completely alien to you. So I'll introduce a little bit about the three different type of ingredients so that you can understand what they are and where they sit. So the ingredients that are the most famous, so the one that we tend to know the most about as consumers, are the natural extract. Okay, so natural extract, you know them because they call essential oil. You also have absolute, so they are naturally extracted from the ingredients that they originate from. Okay, so that's the first one. You then have synthetic ingredients. So synthetic ingredients are essentially individual molecules, scented molecules. They can be natural, they can be fully synthetic. These type of ingredients create the lion's share of what we find in a perfumer organ. And we talk a little bit about it in other videos as well, of this type of synthetic note. And the third kind, and is the one that is perhaps the most complicated or least known, let's say, are called accords. So accords are recomposition of an ingredient, of the smell of an ingredient, essentially. Why do we use accords? So we use accords for different reasons. Sometimes because an ingredient is no longer available or is very, very rare. Sometimes it's because an ingredient is too expensive for you to use in your formula. Sometimes it's because it's limited by law, legally, so you can't use too much of the natural ingredients in the formula, so you have to recompose it. And sometimes it's just because the natural extract is not necessarily what you are looking for your formula. And what you're looking for is a slightly different effect of that note, and therefore you have to reconstitute and remake your own. Okay, so these are called accords. And I would say that within these categories, within the accord categories, you have the accords that belongs to you as a perfumer. You came up with that reconstitution. So these are the real accords, traditional accords. And you've got the off-the-shelf accords, which are called specialties or composition or bases. Okay, so these are ingredients essentially that you buy directly from a supplier. And you've got loads of them, and what I'm going to do in this video is that I'm only going to talk to you about a dozen. Some of the most famous, and some of them have been used for literally 100 years, and they are great to know. I think specialties are great to use if you create perfume at home for a few reasons. First, you've got the historical specialties, so the ingredients that have been around for a very long time, that are popular, but that smells quite perfumey. So what I mean by quite perfumey is quite complex, and they don't necessarily smell like true to nature. Okay, and you've got other specialties more recently that are really made available by ingredients manufacturers because they are really, really true to nature. Okay, so they are born of the long work from the like of Firmenich, of Givaudan, of Simrise, who spend a lot of time recomposing and reconstructing those real live scent, okay, into a composition that belongs to them, but that they sell like this off the shelf. Okay, so we'll talk about the two kinds. So as always, when I talk about ingredients, I like to start with the top note, the fresh, and then I go into the heart, and then I go into the mid, so that not everything is mixed up and we follow that kind of, development and structure into the formula. So the first one that I want to talk to you about is called Cassis Base. So Cassis Base is probably, I would say, one of the most famous specialty, the most famous composition. It's extremely used in commercial perfumery. And so what Cassis Base is? So Cassis Base comes from Firmenich. It's a very famous composition from Firmenich, and Cassis means in French blackcurrant. Okay, so when you smell Cassis Base, it's an ingredient that I love talking about because it's one of my favorite ingredients. When you smell Cassis Base, it's reminiscent of blackcurrant, but it doesn't necessarily smell very, very close to blackcurrant. Okay, so it is at the same time green, at the same time fruity, and at the same time citrusy. Okay, I personally put it into the green family, but you may find it into the fruity family. What is great about Cassis Base, so blackcurrant base, literally in French, from French to English, is that because it sits throughout these different categories, it tends to go quite well. It tends to fit well into perfume. Okay, and it brings also an edge because it's a true top note, so it's very sharp. So how do you describe Cassis Base? Green leafy, like a bush, literally like a blackcurrant bush. So think of this kind of like leaf, like almost like nettle leaf, like it's almost a little bit kind of earthy. And then you have the berry tones to it. So if you think of berry, do not think of blackberry, but think of more of like currant berries, so red currant, black currant, and so it's a little bit more tart. And you have also of all of this kind of, slightly woody, earthy note. And one of the facets that is very prominent in Cassis Base is the grapefruit. Okay, so some people smell the grapefruit straight away. So it's quite sour, it's quite tart. So Cassis Base, great top note. There is nothing like this as a substitute of Cassis Base. It's this kind of complex green fruity notes that is a great one to use if you're looking for a fruity note, but that does not have the sweet tone of fruit. Okay, so something a little bit more sour. So the next one that I want to talk to you about, it's called Prunella. So Prunella here is Prunella. So Prunella is another famous base specialty from Firmenich again. So another one after Cassis Base. So prune in French means plum. Again, you would have understood from the previous one that it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to smell of your real life plum. Okay, so the idea is that these accorded specialties are a creative interpretation, a composition, almost a perfume of what could plum smell of. For me, Prunella, again, like Cassis Base, sits between different categories. It's a fruity note, but it also has the spicy note, and it also has the kind of a woody, balsamic note. Okay, so Prunella, strong scent of plum, like stone fruit. It smells a little bit like macerated wine. So if you think of, port, this kind of smell, so quite grape style. And also it's quite spicy, it's quite woody, and it smells of dry fruit like dates. Okay, so think of something a little bit like sweet dry fruits. So I love Prunella. But Prunella is actually quite difficult to use in perfumery because it's almost too complex. It almost kind of brings a little bit too much. So, I mean, of course, it's an incredible fruity note. It doesn't have the juiciness of like some fruit, so it's quite a base heavy fruit. So think of more like dry fruit as opposed to juicy fruit. Okay, so if you're thinking of bringing this kind of spiciness like rum style, then Prunella can be good. Okay, but again, because Prunella is the type of accord, so a specialty that you could almost like wear like this just on its own. Okay, it's a beautiful specialty that, again, to think of it as this kind of like deep fruit. Okay, so Prunella, a good one to think about if you are looking into that kind of fruity tone to to it. I'm then going to talk to you a little bit about some floral bases, floral specialties. So floral specialties are great, but most of the time perfumers will have their own accords of flowers. Is actually one of the first things that you do when you study perfumery in a perfumer school. You learn how to reconstitute your own accords of rose, your own accord of jasmine, your own accord of tuberose. So it's something actually that we go through quite a bit in our online course if you are interested to kind of understand a little bit more how to reconstitute your own. However, you can also buy this base and specialty, this floral base off the shelf, okay? And there are loads of them. All of the suppliers, Robertet, Firmenich, Symrise, they all have their own version of a jasmine, their own version of a tuberose, of rose. You've got loads of things out there, okay? So if you don't necessarily want to work with your own accords and want an off the shelf because you don't want to go through the hassle of reconstituting or redoing it on your own, then of course go towards this. It can be quite good sometimes to use what's existing, okay? One of the reasons why I like to sometimes use these ingredients is because some of them are actually, for the most recent one, are actually really true to nature. And this is a case of Muguet Vitessence. So Muguet, you will have understood now that most of the suppliers are French and therefore they have a French name. So Muguet in French means lily of the valley. And Vitessence are specialties from Symrise. And so if you smell Muguet Vitessence by Symrise or lily of the valley Vitessence, it takes you straight to the real flower. So Muguet is one of these very special flowers that cannot be extracted. It's impossible. You can't extract the smell of Muguet, of lily of the valley, and therefore you will always have to reconstitute it, recompose it from scratch. So most perfumers have their own version, their own accord of Muguet, using the typical ingredients that you find in the Muguet accord, which are aldehyde cyclamen, bourgeonnal, hydroxycitronellite. So think of everything that has this kind of like, green, pure, clean, floral, petally scent with a touch of rosy note as well, okay? So when you smell lily of the valley, Vitessence, Muguet Vitessence, all of this is already done for you, okay? And you really have like this kind of pure green floral facets, like rosy honey facets of Muguet. So if you're looking for a good reconstitution of lily of the valley, this is one that I recommend, is really good. And I also want to talk to you about rose. So rose specialty or rose reconstitution, you have loads of them. Robertet has one, and Firmenich has one, which is one that I like to use sometimes, and it's called Rose Damascena. So Rose Damascenia. Okay, you've got different version of it, but what I like about Rose Damascenia by Firmenich is that it's a interpretation of rose or reconstitution of rose that plays on the kind of citrus, plum, fruity, fresh aspect of the rose. Okay, so don't necessarily expect that kind of powdery, sweet honey tone of the rose, but more this kind of uplifting, brighter. So in Rose Damascenia you will have the very citrusy, so citronella tone. You will have the tea note as well, so green kind of note. You will have the spicy tone to it. You have the kind of plum grape tone of it as well. So Rose Damascenia is a good reconstitution of rose, not the closest to the real stuff, but it does smell of rose, and it is a great composition. I'm not going to talk to you about the tuberose, the jasmine, etc., because the same principle applies for jasmine, for tuberose, etc. So look, if you are interested in having accords already made for you or specialty, and you don't want to have to go through your making your own jasmine, then look into what Symrise, what Firmenich, what Givaudan and Robertet have in their portfolio of jasmine bases or jasmine specialties. I'm now going to talk to you about two historical bases. Okay, so these are a little bit different historical bases. Why? Because they are more intrinsic to the history of perfumery. And I want to talk to you about the white honey, which is, the real name is miel blanc, so in French, white honey, and the ambre 83, amber 83, and both of these bases, specialties, are from a company that is called De Laire. So De Laire is D-E, and then Laire is L-A-I-R-E. So De Laire no longer exists, but he's been brought back to life by a company called Symrise. And so Symrise have done an amazing job with a team of perfumers of reworking or putting back into life dozens of some of the most traditional, classic, historical of these bases. So bases essentially are pre-perfume, as in the classic way of what De Laire was viewing bases, specialty as, was pre-perfume. So pre-perfume essentially, it's a perfume that you build on top. Okay, so they're extremely complex, they're very perfumey. So when I say perfumey is a strange word that say they already smell like a perfume, like a finished perfume, and they are again meant to be an interpretation of the smell that they're trying to reconstitute, but in a much more creative way. So you have the miel blanc, which smells of white honey. You have the amber 83, which smells of the creative interpretation of amber. You will have Prunella, which smells a little bit like Prunella, like plum. You will have mousse de Saxe. Mousse de Saxe literally means moss of Saxe, which smell a little bit more like kind of leathery, etc. And you have loads of other ones. So if you are interested, you can research them online. Symrise has got great little articles on them. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about the white honey, miel blanc. So miel blanc, do not expect when you smell miel blanc to smell like your real gooey honey, okay? This was not necessarily meant to smell like this, and also miel blanc is quite an old formula, so it means that back then they didn't necessarily have the same ingredients to interpret the smell of honey. But also this creative interpretation of honey is more around the wax aspect of honey, as opposed to this kind of, jammy, gooey aspect of honey. So it smells a little bit like furniture polish, which can be slightly old-fashioned, a bit rosy, a bit powdery. It has this kind of sweet honey tone, but I think that in the case of miel blanc, white honey, the waxy tone to it comes through much, much more predominantly. So if you are looking for a true to nature honey, not necessarily what you're looking for, but if you're looking for something a little bit more like a classic interpretation of honey, then it can be a good one to use. The next one is the ambre 83, so another famous De Laire base, so now Symrise. And so ambre 83, this one absolutely one of the most famous classical base that you can come across. Ambre 83 is this interpretation of a true amber, which is based on vanillin. Is based on the use of ingredients such as labdanum, patchouli, white musk. So what does it smell? It smells of course vanilla, but a spicy vanilla. Okay, so it doesn't smell of your cakey vanilla. So vanillin, yes, smells of your typical kind of cake, sweet vanilla, but because it's got this labdanum facet, this patchouli facet, so it smells slightly more tobacco-y and spicy vanilla. Okay, so the ambre 83, amber 83, for me, Could be a perfume. Literally, I actually love wearing it on my skin. It's beautiful. It's a great ingredient. It's got this kind of, you know, powdery, musky tone to it. So when I say musky, I talk about the real musk. I talk about the white musk, so the kind of powdery baby talcum powder musk. Okay, so think of Amber 83 as a spicy, powdery vanilla, smells of talcum powder, smells of licorice, smells of spice. Great ingredients, perfume on its own, but obviously great to use in your composition. I want to talk to you about leather now. Why leather can't be, again, extracted from the real stuff, the real leather. It's just not a thing. So what do we do in perfumery? We reconstitute the smell of leather, and this can actually be achieved fairly easily by using ingredients such as isobutylquinoline or birch tar or styrax. So think of everything that has a smoky, leathery, also patchouli as well. So think of everything that is kind of like tobacco. But I want to talk to you about one of the most famous leather specialty, which is the Suederal LT. Okay, Suederal. So Suederal LT is again a leather base that smells of leather, but is not a straight, you know, true to nature leather. So don't think of your typical, you know, leather boot or, you know, car leather or something like this, but think of a little bit more of a suede leather, which is why it's got the name Suederal. Okay, so it's literally suede. So what does suede mean? It means like it's a little bit more of a creamy, sweet type of leather, a bit less harsh, a bit less smoky than the real stuff. So Suederal LT, great composition, great specialty, one of the most used among specialties, so a little bit like Cassis Base, used a lot in commercial fragrances, and it's again, if you're looking for a less harsh interpretation of leather, then it can be a good one to use. Now, much truer to the true leather is the, remember the Muguet Vitessence from earlier? So this one is the Cuir Vitessence. So literally leather Vitessence. From the same company that does the Muguet Vitessence, Lily of the Valley. It's from Symrise. So Vitessence is literally this idea of like true to nature reconstitution and interpretation. So this one for me really does smell of your handbag leather or shoe shop. Or so when you smell these ingredients, it takes you straight to like a shoe factory, and it's smoky. It's of course extremely leathery. It's also woody. But the big difference with Suederal, which is a sweeter, softer type of leather, this one has got this kind of harsher, almost burnt plastic scent to it. I don't know if you can see that sometimes, you know, with like new handbag or new leather shoe, you've got this slight petroleum kind of smell. Okay, so this is for me, Cuir Vitessence by Symrise is one of the best true to nature leather. But think of fresh leather as opposed to a leather that is a little bit softer and smoother and a bit more aged leather like the Suederal. So that's for the cuir, the leather. And the last one that I want to talk to you about is the Castoreum base. Okay, so this one is Givco, which means Givaudan. So some of you are going to say, Castoreum is a natural ingredient. Why are you putting this into the base? So yes, it's a natural ingredient in its traditional form, okay, in what we used to find it years and years ago. Castoreum, you can still find it, yes, but it's rare, it's expensive, and is not necessarily used in big commercial fragrance. Actually, it's not used in big commercial fragrance. Why? Because for ethical reason, now so ingredients that are extracted directly from animals are not really used anymore. So you find Castoreum, the real stuff, the real natural extract, in more like artisan perfumery. So what does castoreum means? So castoreum comes from castor, the French word, which means beaver. So the origin of castoreum is extracted from a gland from beaver. So it's been used in perfumery for ages and ages, 100 years ago. And you don't have to kill the animals, but it's a little, I mean, you know, obviously you have to consider certain ethics, and then, you know, what is the implication of like scraping the animal glands to create a perfume ingredients. So yes, castoreum base, which are the reconstitution of the smell of castoreum, do not necessarily smell the same thing, and it will never really smell like the real stuff, but it smells close enough, and you don't have to do anything to the animal. Okay, so castoreum base to use in minuscule proportion, and when you smell castoreum, either the real stuff or the reconstitution. So I personally really recommend that you use and smell the reconstitution rather than the animal-based ingredients. Smells very animalic. So animalic means it smells like an animal. Think of fur, think of skin, think of farm, and think of fecal note. Okay, so fecal note. So think of like more of an animal, like a farm animals. Okay, so for me, castoreum smells a little bit like you know, like a horse. You know, like kind of like a horse house. It smells of like you know, the fur of a horse. It smells of like, so I'm talking about the base, huh? I'm not talking about the real castoreum. It smells obviously of quite phenolic and very kind of, you know, fecal, but not almost like in a sensual way. Okay, so it's not necessarily, when I say fecal, it's not necessarily negative. So some of you might wonder, why do we use this type of ingredients in perfumery? Is because it does bring that kind of really addictive, animalic, sensual kind of, you know, almost like dirty feel to it. Okay, so this is why we use this type of notes in tiny quantity, because of course too much of it then is too much, right? So these type of ingredients, you want to use it into very small quantity. Okay, so I went through all of the ingredients that I wanted to talk to you about today in our specialty composition ingredients video. If you want to learn more about accords, join our online course. We do a lot of, you know, anything that is from like rose accord, tuberose accord, jasmine accord, etc. So this can be really fun. But remember, you can also use the ready-made stuff, and you can use you can smell as well all of these accords in our Perfumers Atelier, which you find just here, just behind me, and you can read all about it in our little book that accompanies. And then otherwise, as you know, we keep posting ingredients videos for you, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you learn a lot about perfumery and the behind the scene of the formula, so that you can understand a little bit better what goes into your perfumes that you wear every day. Thank you very much, and I will see you soon.